Hey, a little while ago, I made this Twitter thread about all the programming languages that I've learned over my life. So I know about 20 programming languages. Of course, some of these much better than others. And people love to argue over which one of them is best. So here's the list of what I've learned and my take on which ones are worth learning in 2022. Now, I'm not an expert in all of these, but I've been tinkering with computers for a long time, and I've read part of a book or done a little project in pretty much every one of these languages. So, the first one I started learning when I was about 12, probably used it until I was about 14 or 15, was Quick Basic. So this was my first real experience in programming, and it came with every DOS computer back in the day in the 90s. And it was a really fun way to put together a game or a little simple calculator or something like that. And I had a lot of fun with that. But then a little bit later, started learning Turbo Pascal in high school. And I made this pretty neat battleship style game on it that I had a lot of fun with, and it was pretty fun to play. A little bit later, when I was in my late teens, I started learning x86 assembly language. And my motivation for this was basically just to learn how to crack copy protection on software. This helped me learn machine architecture, and I later studied it as part of a computer science degree several years later. Another one that I learned a little bit of was Visual Basic, easy language to make Windows GUI apps, and a related language, Visual Basic for applications, which is really useful if you need to do some heavy lifting inside of a Microsoft Office app. In my case, I used it to help my dad do some inventory management stuff for his business. Another language I learned was PostScript, which is a page description language, and that's useful if you want to actually create graphics or generate PDFs from scratch. It's a very weird language, the way the syntax is set up. JavaScript, and also TypeScript to some extent, I started learning that originally way back in 1999, but I didn't get very good at it until maybe about 6 years ago when I started doing a lot more front-end development using mainly jQuery at the time. I started getting a lot better in learning ES6-related JavaScript in the last several years. But yeah, JavaScript's a really useful one, and I use that nearly every day. Of course, another one that I use a lot and that I've been using for a very long time is PHP. I started learning PHP in about the year 2000 to do web applications. Now, my first project was a photo gallery. Perl is also another one that I've used a fair bit, but not for a while, but it's great for text manipulation. It's basically the mother of modern regular expressions. And I used it as a DJ to scan through MP3s and make karaoke songbooks that were deduplicated. So if you're doing this kind of heavy text manipulation, Perl is an awesome language. Another one I learned a long time ago is C, because back in 2000, it was like the language you had to know to be a real programmer. I rarely hear of people using C in production these days, but it was great to learn because it's basically the granddaddy of modern programming languages. C++ is a language I studied in computer science fairly recently, and I've also used it to do a keyboard driver plugin, which was a really interesting project because you had 4 kilobytes of RAM on a really small, cheap microcontroller, and you had to use a lot of really crazy compiler hacks to get things to work. It's a fairly low language, but it's still object-oriented, and that one's still pretty popular. I learned a little C#. I wrote a protocol buffer parser for a real-time transit system app, and I did a project in university using it with .NET Core, which is a little bit like Laravel, but Microsoft's version. Monkey C is a language that Garmin has that you use on their GPS products and devices, and I use that to make some custom computer fields for their cycling GPS, because I do like cycling. SH or Bash shell scripting is also really handy if you have to do any kinds of Linux systems administration. So I've written a few tools to do file manipulation and web scraping using that one. PowerShell is kind of like the Windows equivalent. It's very powerful. It's useful if you have to do any kind of Windows systems administration. Also Python, I had to do a few assignments in university with that. And it's really a language I should learn a lot more of, given how popular and useful it is. It's great for any kind of machine learning tasks. Java, really useful, still taught extensively in university programs. So I use that to do a lot of my courses in school. I built a GUI app with Swing and another one, Cold Fusion and CF Script. I've done a ton of work over the last 10 years in Cold Fusion. I've maintained a lot of legacy apps and built a lot of new apps with Cold Fusion. My current employer still uses it, but we've kind of tried to transition away from it because although it's very friendly and easy to work with for full stack web development, it is a little bit dated, and Adobe owns it, and they have not been the best stewards of that language. SQL or SQL, I've written a ton of SQL, mostly for Microsoft SQL Server, and some Postgres, and a fair amount of MySQL. Some queries I've worked with are like multiple pages long and get pretty complicated. And yes, SQL is a Turing-complete programming language, even if it's not typically used as such, but you do have a lot of quite powerful stored procedures and things like that. At one point, I got really interested in developing applications for the iPhone, so I wanted to learn Objective-C. So I studied that a little bit. That's Apple's programming language that they originally got from Next. So I learned a little bit of that to dabble with iPhone programming, and I didn't get too far. And I also learned a little bit of Swift, and Swift is Apple's newer language for iOS, macOS development. After learning all of these languages over time, I often still feel like I don't know what I'm doing, but which language is the best one of all of these languages I've learned? Easy. It's the language that you can get the work done with the most easily. Whatever language you're most comfortable with, whatever language you feel is most efficient, is the best language for you. It's a very personal question. There's no such thing as a best language. But if you're new to programming and you want to learn something new, you want to learn a language, you want to get started on a career in tech, then what are the languages that are probably important for you to learn? Well, here are my thoughts. Number one, JavaScript. If you ever want to do anything with the web, especially on the front end and also possibly the back end using Node.js, JavaScript is essential, and you should at least learn the very basics of it. Another language that's really handy is Python. It's great for scripting, web backends, or ML. If you have to do any kind of machine learning work, you've got PyTorch and tools like that. PHP is also very widely used on web backends, very popular, fairly easy to learn. It's got a great framework in Laravel, and there are really, for the most part, no costs in getting started with it. Another one, SQL. Learning SQL is super valuable. It's still essential for any kind of backend development. If you want to be a full stack dev or a database administrator, you obviously have to know SQL quite well. And it's not the only type of database, but it's the tried and true one that just about everything runs on. So if you want to become a database person and work on databases, do web backends, things like that, I would recommend getting started with MySQL or MariaDB because they're free, they're super popular, and you just can't go wrong with that. If you learn it, it's fairly easy to transfer those skills to a SQL Server or Postgres or whatever you might have to work with. Java is also very useful if you want to do a comp sci degree or do Android development or get some kind of job where you work on any legacy stack. Now, Java is still super popular and very widely used. So you'll also learn proper object-oriented development and programming principles and machine architecture and all these really great computer science concepts by using Java. So that's a good one to learn as well. C# and the .NET framework are also very popular in enterprise. They're kind of like Microsoft's version of Java. So those are also really good ones to learn, and they're also very popular. They have great frameworks around them, like .NET Core and things like that. So those are good ones to learn as well. I hope you found this video a little bit interesting, just talking about some of my experience. Just a very informal video to kind of talk about my opinions on what the best programming languages to learn are and kind of what my history is. So I hope you found it interesting, and I look forward to discussing what kind of languages you're interested in learning in the comments. Thanks for watching.